I think I should follow on from the last recording on NVC that Marshall Rosenberg. Not to worship the advice. It starts off in chapter 2 of it, pointing out how we are constantly judging other people. But it is the case, really, isn't it, that we do have to classify and judge in that sense. You know, is this person dangerous? I must avoid them. Is this person honest? What's the best way of treating a dishonest person? You know, is it to argue with them? Is it to believe what they say in this circumstance? Is it to walk away and have nothing to do with them? I think the court system tends to go on the view that if you prove this person was lying on something, their evidence from then on is extremely suspect and perhaps shouldn't even be received. That seems to be the revealed policy of the courts, as I understand it. What do you think? You know, it is necessary to realize that, for instance, the obvious, this person's suffering from a disease. Right, now what's the best way of relating to them? You know, don't kiss them goodnight. Might not be a good idea if it's a contagious disease. Or don't leave the windows shut and sit in the room with them for hours if it's an infectious disease. You know, I mean, it's necessary to classify all the time, isn't it? This needs to be kept, this needs to be thrown out. If we don't throw out the rubbish, in the end you can't get into your house. And I've known people that are obsessive hoarders literally be like that. Given they were also overweight, they could no longer get down the hallway. I mean, it's hard to believe, but that's what can happen. In the limit, in the absurd limit, you might think, but yeah. So, unquestionably, we simplify our world, we classify, we group things, and then we treat each group differently. We classify ourselves, you know, am I European? Am I Christian? Am I middle class? Am I, ill at present? You know, I mean, if you are ill and you don't classify yourself as such, and so you treat yourself like you do when you're not ill, well, you're probably not doing the best thing to cope with the illness. You've got to classify things. And you deal with the different classes, the different groups that you've classified into differently vis-a-vis yourself. On the other hand, we do so strongly agree with, I think, that judgment in the sense of carrying out consequent harmful blame, not seeing them as, in some sense now, worthy and whole persons in their own right, not respecting them, I suppose you'd say, I would tend to say not loving them. I'm not sure as Marshall Rosenberg uses the concept of loving. It's more a principle thing with Rosenberg, I think. Sorry, Marshall. I can't say Marshall because that would be me. I have to say Rosenberg. It seems to be, a principle thing with him. And not a question of, you know, in other words, things like respect and we should do this because it achieves a non-violent outcome, which saves us, therefore, the appalling costs of violence. the extreme violence is war, isn't it? And war is just appalling. So he's a great one for achieving peaceful situations, I think, and avoiding conflict. But, well, don't worship the procedure, put it that way. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. Well, that's the obvious, isn't it? We need to know and therefore treat accordingly. But we don't want to know and condemn in some overall way where we impose ourselves on others. We simply want to give opportunity to others to improve as we see it, where they are willing, but not impose and tyrannize, partly because we'll get backlash that we may not be able to cope with. You know, war situation. But we do need to defend what we value, or we may go down a wrong path that we can avoid. We're not seeking harm, therefore, to others, but we are seeking our own way. And we can often, shall I say, have our own way without imposing it on others. So, I mean, in the extreme, we can avoid a noisy neighbour by moving house. But the cost of moving house to us is very high. So we look for other ways. Perhaps it's going to be possible to talk to this person. They may not realise just how much other people want their way of life as much as they want theirs. We can let them know just how problematic the noise is to us. But not, in some sense, threaten them with the repercussions if they don't conform. You know, if my neighbour's conforming against his will, that stress on the relationship could be very costly. So we'd like to persuade without imposing. We certainly classify, you know, for instance, in this case, say that the neighbour's noisy and it is a cost to me. Is that cost greater than or less than the cost I'll have in communicating to him that it's a problem? It may so sour the relationship that we'll be at war with each other forevermore, which means the noise won't abate. Or if it does, it's under duress. He's going to get his own back eventually. Now, that's a situation we ideally would like to avoid. So we're very sensitive about how we set about changing the behaviour of those around us. And very often, by far the better strategy is to make a distance between each other, to avoid, you know, the fence is higher, the hedges thicker, had a priority of putting double glazing on that side of the house. Well, I just abided my time until they moved. I mean, they were in rented accommodation next door, so they'll go eventually, hopefully. And if it doesn't come about, well, you just say this is a difficult neighbourhood. I wonder if in the long run we look for something better. You know, in the short run I shifted my bedroom, say, to the other side of the house. You know, I used that bedroom instead of, yeah, there's all sorts of things you can do, isn't it? I used earplugs at night. I mean, whatever it was that was a solution. But to make a situation where you have a hostility next door, that's very costly. And we try and use non-violent communication to avoid this. And part of that non-violence may just be tolerating some things as a better option than trying to change the person next door. That can be very costly. So we don't blame in the sense of then judging and carrying out some retribution or pressure where we can possibly avoid it. And sometimes you can't. You know, the neighbour's shoveling rubbish over the fence into your garden. Do you shovel it back? Looks like that's a situation of war. Do you go and tell him about it? Are you optimistic about his willingness to hear? Perhaps not. What else can I do? I can thank God for the situation and tolerate it. Does this just present too big a problem in the long run? I've got a bad neighbour and they're not seeming to go. Is it possible to move to a better neighbourhood? You know, there's probably other things wrong with this neighbourhood as well. You know, the man down the street has a dog that's particularly troublesome, you know. Do I prevail by going to the authorities and hope that they keep it under wraps that I'm the cause of the authority bearing down on them? Not keen. Do I not go for walks in that direction in the street? Yeah, well, yes. Still a bit dangerous though, isn't it, you know? In other words, you're particularly cautious of putting pressure on other people. If you do put pressure on them, you will get some sort of payback, which may not be good eventually, unless you move away from it. Tricky, isn't it? Well, we can be much more tolerant and much less stressed if we are thanking God for the situation, despite the fact it's a problem. If we take the presence of mind that simply says, well, don't understand why you're allowing this, Lord, but I thank you for it. Each time it occurs to you that it's a problem, we say, thank you, Heavenly Dad. And you may find it somehow becomes less of a problem to you. You know, you've got used to the noise next door. You've got used to a strategy of driving that part or avoiding that part of the road. It's not ideal. In the long run, God gives an opportunity of moving house to a better neighbourhood, you might well take it. You may not need to. But you try and diffuse the pressure by recognising that God has you in a particular situation for a learning thing. You understand the man down the road, why he keeps the dog, because he's actually in a dog-eat-dog world and he wants a safer situation from his point of view. Or, he may actually want to be a thug that feels safer and more in charge because there's a violence around him which protects him from having to do what other people want. In some sense, you understand his situation, that misguided it may be, but in a sense you know why it's misguided, because perhaps his parents were the same sort of character, He's never had teaching otherwise. And it's a bit late now. He's in a chaos of life that is not going to easily modify his behaviour to be a better neighbour. And there, but for the grace of God, go I. We have received of God a situation of, hopefully, a more congenial, friendly character that's a greater blessing to others. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. But in terms of chapter 2 of Rosenberg, Marshall Rosenberg, we do classify. We are aware this person's a problem, there is a danger, and there is an appropriate behaviour. But that appropriate behaviour is not so much judgmental and vindictive and hostile and pressuring. That appropriate behaviour is understanding, trusting God, and doing what one can to gain a better outcome than we would gain by being hostile, difficult, pressing against another's will. I think that's all we can say. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. Overall, then, what's important to bear in mind is that if you're using force, in effect, pressure, to change another person's behaviour against their will, there's going to be cost if they can find a way of doing it to you. Unless they just flee, of course, out of your presence for good. They're going to resist having to do that, aren't they? And they may not resist in the same godly way as you do, by simply thanking God and doing what they can to not pressurize you. They may want to very much use force, and you don't want that situation. If you can avoid it, for the best. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. Well, I think of some chap I know who doesn't like me pressing on him a certain fact that I believe and he doesn't. So I back off and don't do it, and try to avoid circumstances where I might be tempted to want to press him with this fact again. To some extent then, this does distance our relationship. But there are other features about our relationship that I value. So I don't simply just increase the distance between us, but I do try to distance on certain issues that are contentious. You know, it used to be said in social interaction among at least with the Europeans that you don't talk about economics, politics, or religion because there's such contentious issues where there's such strong opinions. It simply makes interaction, friendship, and fellowship impossible. You can understand, but on the other hand, so many issues that you had to therefore avoid that conversation became trivial and social interaction became worthless, really. Not a godly achievement at all. So you avoided that sort of social interaction. You seek company where you don't have to be so constrained because you're with persons of like mind to some extent. That makes the interaction still very valuable to you. So we do classify. We do avoid certain groups of people. You know, people that are occupied with crime are not good company to keep, and you don't achieve a great deal by fellowshipping with them. In fact, you become more like them than them like you if you crowd your life with such company. It's best to be wise. Choose you this day whom you will serve, whom you will love, whom you will mix with, whom you'll be friendship with. You know, and if he treats you badly as you understand it and you can't do anything to have him willingly change his will, then you have to treat him as a heathen person, as it was said in the Jesus story. And that did not mean fellowship. That meant keeping away from interaction with such wherever you can. And sometimes you can't. The cost is too high. You know, I have to leave my job to avoid this particular person at work. That's a bit drastic. What are the ways I can find of avoiding them living with it without it poisoning everything else? If, on the other hand, it does poison everything else, well, then you start to look for opportunities that God may be giving you to move and do something about it is truly an improved situation, not one of hostile confinement of the other, unless you really have absolutely no option, in which case find a better way out as soon as you can. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. But usually you can find ways of reducing the stress and the problem considerably. And the rest may just take care of itself, by which I really mean God may deal with the rest quite wonderfully. Thank you.